Today, we're going to crack open the history books to get a handle on an economic system that basically ran the world for 300 years. And, believe it or not, its ghost is still rattling around in our headlines. We're talking about mercantilism, the original trade war.
You know, when we hear about tariffs, trade deficits, and countries duking it out for economic dominance, it all feels so now. But what if I told you the playbook for all of this was actually written centuries ago?
To really get what's happening in today's economic battles, we've got to ask a fundamental question. Why do countries fight over trade in the first place? Well, the answer isn't in today's news. It's buried in a really powerful, really old idea about how you create wealth, or maybe how you take it.
So let's meet the main character here, mercantilism. From the 1500s all the way to the late 1700s, this was pretty much the only economic game in town in Europe. And it wasn't dreamed up by some philosopher in an ivory tower. Nope. This was championed by merchants and government officials. Their goal was simple: make the state powerful. And their way of keeping score was just as simple. How much gold and silver, or bullion, have you got piled up in the royal treasury?
Okay, so if the goal is just to hoard as much gold as possible, how do you actually do it? Well, these mercantilist nations had a very clear playbook, a set of rules for winning this global economic game. This quote from Thomas Mun, who was a director of the British East India Company, just lays it all out crystal clear. He's saying the main way to get rich is through foreign trade, and there's one golden rule. You have to sell more stuff to other countries than you buy from them, period.
The logic here is pretty straightforward, right? If you export more than you import, other countries have to pay you for the difference. And back then, they paid you in the one thing everybody wanted: cold, hard cash, gold and silver. This was what they called a favorable balance of trade. More stuff going out meant more gold flowing in, and that made the nation richer and more powerful.
And this right here, this reveals the absolute core of how they saw the world. Mercantilists believed global wealth was a fixed pie, a zero-sum game. If your country got a bigger slice, it meant, by definition, that another country had to get a smaller one. Your gain was literally their loss. That is a world away from the modern view, which says that trade can actually make the whole pie bigger, creating new wealth so everybody can get a bigger slice. So how did they put this zero-sum idea into practice? Well, colonies were the engine of the whole system. Think of it like this. The mother country is a big grocery store. The colonies are the farmers, and they are forced to supply cheap raw materials, wool, timber, sugar, only to that store. The store then takes that raw wool, turns it into expensive cloth, and then sells it right back to the farmers, who, by the way, were forbidden by law from making their own cloth. It was this completely closed, exploitative loop designed to suck all the value back to the mother country. And they were absolutely not messing around when it came to protecting this system. To keep England's wool industry on top, they passed a law that made it illegal to export live sheep. Now, the penalty for a first offense wasn't some slap on the wrist. No, they'd take all your property, lock you in prison for a year, and they would cut off your left hand. A second offense, that was punishable by death. That's just how far they were willing to go to control trade. So yeah, it's pretty obvious this system wasn't exactly designed to benefit everybody equally. So let's ask, who were the real winners in the mercantilist era, and who ended up paying the price? The winners were a pretty small, elite club, which kind of explains why this system stuck around for so long. You had the merchant capitalists, these massive trading companies, and government officials with special privileges. Economists today have a term for this: rent-seeking. It's basically rigging the game, using your political connections to get special treatment like a monopoly that lets you make huge profits you could never get in a fair fight. And the losers? Well, that was pretty much everyone else. You had ordinary folks back home who had to deal with high prices and very little choice. The colonies were intentionally kept dependent, their own economic growth totally stifled. And of course, the native populations in those colonies often bore the heaviest cost of all, displaced from their lands and devastated by new diseases. For centuries, it really seemed like mercantilism was just the way things were. But eventually, a powerful new set of ideas started to bubble up that would completely change the game. People started pointing out some massive flaws in the whole theory. First, the mercantilists confused the symbol of wealth, gold, with actual wealth, which is a country's ability to produce stuff people need. Second, that whole zero-sum thing was just plain wrong. They couldn't see how specialization in trade could make both countries better off. And finally, the entire system just ignored the well-being of regular people. It was all about hoarding treasure for the king. And the intellectual knockout punch came in 1776 from a guy named Adam Smith.
In his incredible book, The Wealth of Nations, he just tore mercantilism apart. He argued that wealth isn't some fixed pile of gold you fight over, it's something you create through production and voluntary trade that helps both sides. He gave us the idea of the invisible hand, showing how free markets, not government control, could lead to more prosperity for everyone.
So, with these brand new ideas, the tide really started to turn. After rising up in the 1500s and getting locked in with laws like the Navigation Acts, mercantilism was intellectually dismantled by thinkers like Smith. By the 1800s, the world was starting to shift towards a new era of classical economics and much freer trade. But the story doesn't just end there. Because while mercantilism as an official system is long gone, its ghost, well, it still haunts the halls of power today.
Now first, let's give them a little credit where it's due. In their obsession with tracking every coin coming in and going out, mercantilists actually developed a super important tool, the balance of payments. It's basically the accounting system we still use today to track all the economic stuff happening between one country and the rest of the world.
And this is where all that history suddenly becomes incredibly relevant to right now. When you hear politicians talking about tariffs to protect local jobs, or constantly worrying about trade deficits, or pushing buy national campaigns, all of those are modern echoes of that same old mercantilist thinking. They all come from that deep-seated gut feeling that trade is a competition you have to win, not a cooperative thing where everyone can benefit. Which, of course, leaves us with the big one. The question that's been debated for 500 years and is maybe more important now than ever. When we look at the global economy, should we see it as that fixed pie where for us to win, someone else has to lose? Or is it possible to build a system where everyone can win together? The answer to that question defined our past, and it's definitely going to shape our future.